decides to go live. Hey, there we are. We are officially live. So, I'm Marking Bad. I'm the shitlord in charge with the chirping phone. With me today, I have, left to right on my screen, Magnus Deacon with the large truck.
Hello.
And then I've got Philosophy Nerd. He's got a background in education and in literary criticism, and now he's working on philosophical criticism.
Awesome. Hi, everyone. How are y'all doing?
And then after that, we have Socrates of Athena, not the original, but as close as we could find to such, and he's one of those college-y type people. So he's going to help us examine how he's seeing this stuff occurring now. And the whole purpose of this hangout is going to be to examine, not just in the context of modern society, how feminism seems to be functioning, but also how it's informed philosophically by, in particular, postmodernism and deconstructionist philosophy.
I didn't get to say hello.
Sorry. There's Socrates there. Sorry.
Hello,
I'm a bad
everyone.
man.
I've just woken up. Oh, God. Everything hurts.
Just to give a bit of a background, can you all hear me?
Yep.
Okay, so just to give a bit of a background of where I'm coming from with this. First, I actually didn't. I wasn't an academician to start off with. I actually went to. I was in the military for from 2001 to 2008, and I actually have a tour of Afghanistan under my belt. My biggest concern when it came down to it is because I started off as an English major in the University of Central Florida, moved into education, and was there for 2 years. What was interesting is that I noticed what they call the critical pedagogy, which is a mix of feminism, Marxism, and a deconstruction towards education. And this has caused a lot of problems. I have even gone back for a second master's in English, and I actually took a feminist course and a feminism course. And the interesting thing about that is a lot of I've noticed even in the graduate level of feminism, it's all about bitching, moaning, and complaining. And I think we can figure out why that occurs a lot through this discussion.
Well, I'm certainly hoping so.
Well, you know, if you're going to go to college and become a professional bitch artist, you might as well go all the way.
Right?
Marking Bad, there is no chat for some reason.
I know.
Comments are enabled I've never seen that. Comments are enabled while we're live. I've never seen that.
Yeah, so apparently I fucked up somehow. Apparently I managed to double schedule an event, and one of them clearly has the comments enabled, and should have the chat enabled, and it doesn't. And I have no fucking idea. Chalk it up to me being technologically inept.
Yeah, no, I'm looking at both of those events, and neither of them have a chat, I don't think, but both of them somehow have comments enabled while it's live. That's weird.
Yeah, Socrates, you're making me feel sorry for you. I'm running like a parody version of that parody song Chris Reagan did in my head. Because of you. Everything is painful. Everything's a part of the patriarchy. Everything is painful for poor Socrates.
Wow,
Doesn't that kind of reminds me of that? What is that? What's the name of that song? "Safe Space" from South Park.
Oh no, it's that.
No, I was actually kind of parodying that song Chris Reagan did.
Oh wow.
Well, also, if you haven't seen it, the Lego Movie, way better than it ever had any rights to be.
It's kind of a sad thought.
No, it's just, anyway, moving on.
Right. So
yeah, I don't wake up well.
So we should probably start with a generic definition for postmodernism, that the bulk of people that are going to be watching this will understand. So anybody want to take that on, or shall I mention Jean-Francois Lyotard?
Well, I think what we should do is this is what comes from the Encyclopedia of Philosophy from Stanford University. It says
I have that one.
Yeah, It is in the comments section. So it says, quote, the term postmodernism first entered the philosophical lexicon in 1979 with the publication of the Postmodern Condition by Jean-François Lyotard. So the big question the big question right here is that we have to go into the precursors. It says right here, quote, in the precursors at the beginning, the philosophical modernism at issue in postmodernism begins with Kant's Copernican revolution. That is his assumption that we cannot know things in themselves, and the objects of the knowledge must conform to our faculties of representation.
Which means that largely we can't intrinsically know about a thing. We have to judge based on what inputs we have about it.
Yeah, pretty much. And in a way, that's what the biggest. So the biggest influence we have to handle right now.
Well, hold on, because there's a more common sense way to put that, and basically the modern phrase for it is the map is not the territory. And it makes sense when you think about it, because a map just represents a territory. It's not the territory in itself. But you can definitely make an argument that that's not always the case. I mean, if you have a good enough representation of a territory, well, it's good enough. It basically might as well be.
Well,
that's kind of where the whole postmodernism thing starts from. I mean, the map is not the territory is kind of a more modern way of putting it, but that's basically what they're after.
Here's something that if you go to pbs.org, where it deals with postmodernism, I think PBS has a pretty good definition as well. Quote, postmodernism is post because it denies the existence of any ultimate principles, and it lacks the optimism of there being a scientific, philosophical, or religious truth which will explain everything for everybody, a characteristic of the so-called modern mind. Pretty much, so modernism itself believes pretty much modernism is a middle finger to kind of like the pre-modern era, pretty much saying, okay, well, there is even though we're going to rebel against you guys, but
keep in mind the pre-modern era is the non-scientific, non-empirical one. That's the era where you have people arguing, like Plato, that there's some ultimate reality, that what we see is not what actually is the case, and things like that.
Well, here's
that the kind of time in history where two churches completely split over an argument of whether or not Adam and Eve had belly buttons?
well, here's the thing: is that so you have your modernism, which it did develop all the way up into World War II, and then World War II is really what we have, where you have a spring of postmodernism coming out, which is postmodernism pretty much says you cannot ultimately know the truth.
Which is the argument for there are no objective truths. There are no things that are absolutely 100% known.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that bullshit makes my head hurt.
Well, the funny thing, I suspect that given how many of the philosophers were from places that Nazi Germany had conquered, that most of this was just rebelling against, German academics, because before Nazis, took power, well, German scientists and academics and everything were among the best in the world, and they had German universities had the most influence.
This is what we also have to understand too is the way it really got into the way we actually see it creeping into American academics is the fact that behind the Iron Curtain, they actually had a thing called Russian formalism, where it's the text and only the text that matters. The idea of the author doesn't matter. The author is dead, so to speak. But
well, that bleeds into the whole. If you've read George Orwell's The 1984, well, there you go.
and so
Yeah,
here's
that just to give an idea, that book title gets dragged up so much, I'm fucking sick of hearing it.
I
because
heard it recently. It's actually a really good and on-point book, and it
I
is
know, but
relevant.
I mean, yeah, it is, but that's why I'm getting sick of fucking hearing it.
Well, no,
here's
it's relevant. It's talking. George Orwell was talking about Soviet Russia, so I mean, it's those ideas.
So let's so here's where Russian formalism itself actually Russian formalism itself actually dealt with a text kind of like in a scientific way, as empirical as it can, with a piece of literature. Well, when a lot of these scholars actually moved into the Czech Republic and eventually escaped the Iron Curtain, which that actually flowed into you see that flowing into France. You see that eventually flowing into the UK, into
But
America.
hey, philosophy nerd. No, there's also another problem with Russian formalism is that regardless of how empirically based they claimed to do so, once you disregard the author's intention and you're just analyzing language, the only thing you have at that point is arguments of interpretation. There is no empirical analysis at that point.
And I agree. But what I'm doing right here is I'm just being I'm being more informational than I'm being argumentative. Either I'm just saying what happened.
Well,
and I'm trying to go.
But this is one of those things where this is something that happens after Russian formalism too, because you have each subsequent school of thought all laying claim to something that they're not doing.
Well, here's where it gets really interesting. Is actually you have new criticism, which actually is birthed out of Russian formalism, where instead of dealing with it scientifically, they deal with it aesthetically. And then so you have backlash against backlash against backlash. In fact, combining a concept of Foucault, Derrida, some of the historical method. Stephen Greensblatt actually came up with new historicism, which pretty much is historically analyzing a text came back with a vengeance, but kind of with a postmodern twist. And this also had a huge impact on what we would understand as feminism today. And I think that actually
hold on. You skipped over an important point. You skipped over an important phase there, which is this historicism itself.
Yeah, historicism. Well, you have the old historicism, and then you have the new historicism. Pretty much the old historicism pretty much thinks of it as in linear, but it's in new historicism, it pretty much ebbs and flows. But to keep it...
Yeah, well, relevant to both of those, Karl Popper wrote a book called The Poverty of Historicism. So if anyone's curious about that, they can go and read it to get, an academic philosopher's critique of it. Basically...
Well, here's what I think you guys need to do. Lay out the main points of postmodernism, just so everybody gets to know what you're talking
it's getting there. Historicism is kind of the precursor to it, along with the new critics and so forth. These different schools in different parts of academia kind of bled together, because what happened with this school of literary theory is it took all of these different areas of literature-related academics like history, linguistics, and so forth. It took all of those and just bled them together.
Yeah, so not only do you have this concept that there are no objective truths, that there's nothing we know for sure, but then you've got the examination of language. This is where the deconstruction comes in, where you take words or sentences and you break them down to understand historically what the content or what the intent of the literature was, and
Well,
then
I'm getting there, but
yeah.
I just need to quote the poverty of historicism here so everyone can understand what historicism was about. It's just one paragraph, so it's pretty short, and it reads, It will be enough if I say that I mean by historicism an approach to the social sciences, which assumes that historical prediction is their principal aim. So they're on about historical prediction, and which assumes that this aim is attainable by discovering the rhythms or patterns or the laws or the trends that underlie the evolution of history. So they were trying to use the forms of science, and analysis, hypothesis, prediction to predict the future. New historicism kind of dropped the pretense entirely and sort of lost touch with reality in that regard.
Well, the problem is that new historicism, it's fundamentally a form of romanticism where you try to place yourself in the boots of the person that wrote it and try to analyze it from their perspective entirely,
Well,
as though you were there.
Yeah, they dropped the pretense of trying to predict the future from the past, but old historicism was basically, trying to do that. So they figured, if you can make some rules about the past, you can know the future. And this is where you get a lot of, a good example. They were basically trying to be what economics is today. And anyone who's ever read anything about economics knows that you cannot really predict the future with economics either. And this is kind of what Karl Popper is criticizing in The Poverty of Historicism. You cannot predict the future from the past. You just can't.
No, you can take lessons from the past to prevent reenactment of the past, but that's about it.
Yeah, and you can propose that given similar conditions, you might get a similar result, but you cannot, say...
There's no guarantee of that. We're not dealing with Isaac Asimov's Foundation series where there's psychohistory that tells us what's going to happen.
Yeah. Oh, psychohistory. That book is good. Anyway.
Okay.
Anyway, so let's.
Yeah, we can continue from here because it's just like 2 more stops to postmodernism. I think.
Well, you guys mentioned psycho. You guys mentioned psychohistory. Sounds like a great way to segue into feminism.
Well, I think in Beginning Theory, an introduction to literary and cultural theory by Peter Berry, there's actually 6 breakdowns that he brings into specifically the chapter on postmodernism. He says 1. They discover postmodernist themes, tendencies, and attitudes within literary works of the 20th century and explore their implications. 2. They foreground fiction which might be said to exemplify the notion of the disappearance of the real, in which the shifting postmodern identities are seen. For example, the mixing of literary genres, the thriller, the detective story, the myth saga, and the realist psychological novel, so on and so forth. So pretty much, when we look at it, it's going back to the thing. One of you said something about it being a blender. That's we're actually getting into that blending part right there. And
I think well. Are you just going to go straight into postmodernism then? Because at the very least, I would want to bring up the Frankfurt School and
bring up the
Frankfurt School.
Bring up at least. I think the reason why I want to go straight to postmodernism after the Frankfurt School is because we have to deal with the fact that you and we all can actually listen to each other, but we're balls up against the wall because of attention span. So. Let's bring that up, and then we got to.
We're kind of accelerating through an overview of theory of literature here, like we're on cocaine. But yeah.
All right. Well, that's my thing. Is that but we gotta, like I said, we gotta deal with eventually the what.
Well, yeah. I mean, it's
cool.
So guys, if you haven't completely lost me yet, you're doing fine. Just keep.
Yeah. So we go from historicism to new historicism, and simultaneously on the literature side, we've got. Who was just before the Frankfurt School? Was it the New Critics, or is that after? There was one just before the Frankfurt School I'm forgetting.
There's so much out there. I can't remember. I'm sorry.
Well, it doesn't matter. Suffice it to say, the Frankfurt School of Literature is kind of a new Marxist tradition that popped up in America as well. And basically, a lot of these people were academics who moved to the United States to begin teaching, and they had one particular problem in mind, which is, Karl Marx in his academic paper, in his books and so forth, predicted that the proletariat should rise up. It should happen organically. And what they were seeing overseas and with all the wars and conflict is that the proletariat wasn't rising up. What the hell was happening? What's wrong here? So a lot of their theories that came out of that was, oddly enough, explaining that the proletariat, the working class, would not rise up because they had internalized their oppression. So they would keep themselves down. That's one of the major things that came out of the Frankfurt School.
It's actually something that Mercedes Carrera, of all people, brought to my attention. It's the concept of slave morality. So not only do you have people that will inherently seek out to maintain the systems in which they are trapped, but you also have this bizarre passive-aggressive behavior of these people trapped in order to lash out against the system simultaneously.
Yeah, but Frankfurt School didn't get the second part. All they came to conclude...
Is that where the whole idea of internalized whatever started?
Yep. Internalized misogyny, internalized homophobia, internalized racism, etc., etc., etc.
And this also came from Freudian ideas. See, that kind of opened the gateway, this whole sense that there are subconscious desires and things. Well, that just opened up the gateway for everyone with their own pet theory to go, oh, you've got, a subconscious desire, or you've got a subconscious whatever. So you see, around all of this time, from the 1900s to the 1960s, there's all of these independent developments in the sciences, but also in philosophy and the soft sciences, that all just kind of blended together to make a headache.
Can you do, before we go on, I think one thing I kind of forgot to bring up is actually the other part of psychoanalytical theory. It's called, a major part of it is Jacques Lacan, Lacanian theory.
And he informed Derrida in particular. If we need proper pronunciation of the various French names, that would be my job.
Okay, can you explain how do you pronounce Jacques Lacan so we can?
It's Jacques Lacan. It's pretty.
Yeah, there's no S.
Jacques. Just
Jacques,
kind of a funny version. It's the French version of Jack.
Okay.
It's spelled with a Q.
Would that be anything like the famous French football player Jacques Strap?
Similar.
Might as well be, right? Well, I think so. What we also have to understand is, like, when it came to Freudian theory, is that at least it was readable. When you actually go into Lacanian theory, you actually find that it's
very obtuse.
Very obtuse.
I have not actually read Lacan.
My dad keeps trying to get me to read Lacan and Hegel because they directly inform much of what Derrida discusses. The problem is that these are people that are being literary deconstructionalists, and they actually make it much more difficult to understand what the fuck they're going on about.
Okay, well, if we're now to this point, past the Frankfurt School and the Marxist influence on this, I did write a post for problematic people that they haven't gotten around to actually reviewing and posting yet. But I made an outline of what deconstruction is. Supposedly it's a good outline. So I can read it here for us so we all have a clear idea. Because it's in plain English, unlike the Wikipedia page. Go ahead and check the Wikipedia page, people. I guarantee most of you will not be able to understand it. In fact, I don't even think Philosophy Nerd will understand it. Have you ever checked that page? Seriously.
The page of what for
For
postmodernism?
postmodernism, deconstruction, Derrida, most of it is written to be as deliberately obtuse as possible.
Well,
In other words, you might as well just not even bother reading it because you're not going to understand a fucking word of it.
Well, that's actually the reason why I have in front of me like two different introductory literary theory books. It's just in case something like that comes up, then I can go to those, and then we can move on.
So, moving on to my little summary here. First thing to understand about deconstruction is this is, at its heart, a linguistic theory. So they're seeking to explain how language works. That's all it initially was trying to do, really. Now, construction is the idea that our language can only describe reality. This is, again, the map is not the territory thing. It only describes reality, but it cannot be reality. You know, there's a difference. That's their first premise. The second thing is that deconstruction is the process of having proven a construction does not match reality. Their specific way of doing it, though, is to point out that there is a binary. So there are two terms that are opposites. And their second premise here is that if you have a binary opposite like light and dark, the language is flawed. Because supposedly, according to their premise, reality does not have binaries. So their thinking would be there isn't light.
You also need words like dawn, dusk, etc. to supplement it.
Yeah, exactly. So there cannot be true binary in language, is what they're saying, if it's going to accurately represent reality, because there are shades of light.
Just to be very very clear, the concept we have to. I think the biggest concept we have to keep in mind is that the structuralists and post-structuralists have a thing called the binary opposition, and so when feminists actually say the binary this and the binary that, they've actually cut it. They've cut the term short, and so I think it makes it a lot more sense when people understand that binary opposition is, for example, the word white and the word black, and if you're going to go for like a literary criticism position, a literary criticism analysis of, like, let's say Snow White, like the term white stands for righteousness, goodness, and whatnot, and black stands for evil and whatnot. So how would a deconstructionist pretty much show that there are fractures within the language of the text itself? And this is where it's going to get interesting.
Well, yeah, but before we go down that rabbit hole, just to summarize: construction, the map is not the territory; deconstruction.
Well, and also relevant to specifically how Derrida treated deconstruction of language.
Oh Lord.
Is the concept that once you have deconstructed a given word or phrase or concept linguistically, you have to reconstruct it. This is not. Yeah. There was an implicit binary set of actions required. Yeah, you can't just tear apart a word and go, this word isn't good enough.
They would reconstruct it in the sense that in the whole reconstruction argument, what you're going to be arguing for is that there are either non-binaries, or you're going to make non-binaries because supposedly reality does not have contradictions. That's the underlying premise of this rationalism. So they're thinking reality does not in actuality have binaries, language is wrong, and so you need to correct the language. You need to correct your understanding.
So this is actually where it gets really interesting, because I've one thing I've noticed is that you'll notice that a lot of feminists will use this kind of deconstruction and come up with what do they call it? New speak. If we use 1984
That's a good one. That's
language.
a good one. Yeah, it is newspeak. Yeah.
And so I think this can actually head us off. Before we actually go down that rabbit trail, which route do we want to take at this point?
I think we can just go directly into how feminism got involved in this nonsense, because now we're at the point where we've gone through some basic history, so we know what the Frankfurt School is, we know what historicism is, we know what those are. And what we don't know at this point is, okay, so feminism was around, 1900s to 1960s, where all this shit starts happening. How the hell did feminism get involved in that?
Okay, so here is this is where actually because spiritual history is kind of my thing. One of the biggest things that you have to actually take into account is that feminism itself is not entirely empirical. It's not empirical. If you want to know how it got into this ebb and flow of all this ethereal stuff, this esoteric mumbo jumbo, the biggest thing you have to
language. Keep it in pay grade. Keep it in the pay grade.
Okay. So esoteric
I know
pretty
what
much
esoteric means, but keep in mind.
Okay, so pretty much you have, from Russia, you have a person that came into the U.S. by the name of Helena Blavatsky. She is founded in 1875 the Theosophical Society, and eventually you have, now this is where the grasp this is where the foundation for feminism to really get into the UN starts coming in. The fact of the matter is that you have a chain of events. Helena Blavatsky wrote Isis Unveiled, The Key to Theosophy, and all that stuff. And she brought in the Hinduistic philosophies and a mix of other stuff. And now this is where it gets interesting, is that she also brought in some theosophical, some theistic Luciferian ideas with it.
You're moving too quickly on that. From my guess, is most people would just understand she was an occultist, is what most people would call her, and you did not. What is theosophy?
Pretty much theosophy itself. Theosophy in of itself tries to claim itself as a science, that it is that all these belief systems have little nuggets of the truth that are all fragment all together, and it's all about scientifically taking these truths and starting to splice them together. So pretty much it's taking all these religions and putting them under one umbrella and blending them in, as you said, the blender. It's pretty much that blender.
Yeah, so most of y'all's bullshit detector would be going off at this point, but it literally means the words Theosophy is God's wisdom. So
God, the wisdom of God.
Theological sophistry to me, but that's just me.
But now this is where it gets interesting. After she passed away, her heir Annie Wood Besant took over. You also had C.W. Ledbetter. I'm not going to go into a whole lot of detail, but Annie Wood Besant was a humanist. She at first was an atheist, but then she got involved with Helena Blavatsky, and it moved on from there. Now, what's interesting is this laid the foundation for the big ensemble of this, the Lucis Trust. The Lucis Trust itself was founded in the 1940s by a woman by the name of what is her name? Alice Ann Bailey, and her husband Foster Bailey. And so the Lucis Trust was originally named the Lucifer Publishing Company. Now it's called the Lucis Publishing Company. Now what's interesting is her philosophy. In her lifetime, she wrote 24 volumes. 20 of those, she claims, was written through her in auto writing methods through a person by the name of Dijwal Kul, she claimed to be a Tibetan.
You're completely losing me right here, because how does this lead into feminism?
I'm gonna explain this in a bit.
Okay.
This is where it gets interesting. These 24 volumes. The United Nations when it was founded in the 1940s. Her organization actually became what we call the spiritual foundation of the UN, and this is actually admitted to in the Geneva Yearbook of 2008, and other subsequent ones where they actually admit that that organization is represented on the Social and Economic Council of the UN. And what's interesting is that UN leaders such as Robert Mueller admit that that their ideas of globalization are actually based on her 24 volumes. And so pretty much these theosophical values are now being driven through the UN, being driven through occultism and stuff like that, and now it has been adopted. These mystical ideas have actually been adopted by feminism. So feminism has these theosophical elements, and plus the deconstructed elements.
Hold on. You kind of skipped over the part of how they're related. I think one of them was an activist, that Annie Besant.
Annie Besant, yes.
She was an activist, so I think she's the one who got involved with the suffragette movement, right?
Mm-hmm. And that's so.
Mark, is that for real? I gotta ask.
That is. So this was going to be my segue to give you all watching kind of an understanding of how Lacan and Marxist theoretical frameworks work. Apparently, somebody in I'm going to pronounce this like shit. Aberystwyth University in the UK has written something called Gazing Awry, Reconsidering the Tourist Gaze and Natural Tourism Through a Lacanian Marxist Theoretical Framework. So, once upon a time, these philosophers are deriving their philosophical stances and views from Lacan, Marx, Hegel, and Derrida, who all have this deconstructionist aesthetic to their operation. These are the people that are feeding what we now see in modern university and college settings. These are people that are basically back in the 60s when all of the bra burning and all of the Kent State riot and all that stuff happened. The people that were looking for ways to strike out against what they perceived as the man and the system were absorbing the works of these people. And these people then became academically entrenched, and they have formed curriculum based on their appropriation of this material.
And the funny thing is, this is actually a really good example, because the specific title that you mentioned, if you go and look at the abstract, I mean, Google the title, Gazing Awry, whatever, and look at the abstract, it's basically a sort of psychoanalysis through a given lens, which Sargon of Akkad made a video about lenses that was rather funny. But again, all of this is still based in psychoanalytic theory. That if you look at the world through a certain lens, you'll more closely get to some truth for somebody. This sort of subjectivist approach to psychology, but this has no credibility in psychology anymore, and so what they do is they masquerade it through whatever they can get away with. Oh, I'll just publish this in the literature.
Or I'll publish this in anthropology, or in philosophy, or in sociology, which, again, you start to get these bizarre intermixtures of pseudo-Marxist theory, because, I mean, Marxist theory at its base is a binary opposition.
And
it
Freudian
is the oppressed.
analytics.
Yeah.
And Freudian analytics. So what Philosophy Nerd was saying too is then you also have this bizarro occultism strain.
Well, if I can interject, what it sounds like to me is they're trying to destroy binaries that actually have been proven to work and creating binaries that aren't worth a fuck.
Well, they're assuming binaries don't exist.
Well, here's the interesting thing. The externalization of the hierarchy, which is probably one of the more important books, including Education in the New Age by Alice Bailey. These actually, in fact, this reminds me, the idea of Common Core really is. If you read Education in the New Age and Externalization of the Hierarchy, Common Core pretty much falls and flows with that. And that actually, what's interesting is that these Marxist ideas are combined with mystical elements, these Luciferian mystical elements of theosophy.
Do you have an example?
Yeah, actually I do. Can you continue on, because I actually have to get into my bookshelf to pull.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, you know what? Continue, because actually I can get it for free online. I'll come back in just a moment.
Okay. Well, I don't know much about that strain of history. Most of the history I know of is the academic history. Like I said, the influence of Freudian psychoanalytics. I mean, it's to copy the soundbite, it's 2016, and there are literally still schools of thought using Freudian psychoanalytics. And I have a good reason for that, too. And this is going to segue into where we're heading with this topic. If you've gone to college, or if you haven't gone to college, you know that there are prerequisite courses for, like your first 2 years. You have to take a whole bunch of bullshit classes to get to the classes you actually want to take. So if you're a STEM major, if you're in computer science, math, engineering, whatever, you still have to satisfy general education requirements. So you have to take English classes, you have to take health classes, you have to take all this other bullshit.
Well, and some of these classes are the classes that I would question their value or validity in the context of somebody, say, taking accounting or a STEM field of whatever description.
But, they also, most people will take a psychology course at some point. Now, Psychology 101, the usual literature that they cover, tends to get to Freud and cover Freud extensively. This is where a little knowledge is dangerous, and this is my little pet theory, is that most of this in the modern era comes from the failings of our educational model. A little knowledge is dangerous, because if you have too much certainty over a little knowledge, you produce bullshit papers like Markingbad just mentioned.
You produce ideologues with a small amount of actual information and a great deal of ability to come up with theory with nothing supporting it.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, I'm back. This is why you have... Okay, I'll segue to you in just a second. But yeah, this is why you have people in 2016 who are, when psychology is way, way past Freudian analysis, you still have people, to this day, essentially producing academic literature from the perspective of Freudian analytics, which is utterly ridiculous in terms of actual psychology. It is utterly ridiculous, and it's still happening. So there's no interdisciplinary scrutiny being done here. I mean, if you had a modern psychologist read some of these sociology or theory of literature papers, they'd probably laugh themselves all the way out of the institution.
So here's Alice Bailey. Like I said, this is not a person to scoff at, because of the simple fact that you have multiple people basing their philosophical concepts on her.
I'm still going to scoff at her.
Yeah, but scoff at, I would say scoff at her in the sense of the fact that she's bullshit. But as far as the importance of understanding her, That's a whole different
So
story.
where does that play in? Tell us where she plays in.
Here's external. I'm not going to. I'm going to go into a few of her points here on page 190 and not 191 of externalization of the hierarchy. It's point one. This is interesting. The new world order. She coined this term.
Wait, she coined the term New World Order?
Yes, she did. It comes from her.
Holy shit.
The New World Order must meet the immediate need and not be an attempt to satisfy some distant idealistic vision. 2. The New World Order must be appropriate to a world that has passed through a destructive crisis into a humanity which is badly shattered by the experience. Interesting, yeah?
Yeah, considering modern the modern politics of our day, yeah.
Yeah, so 3, the New World Order must lay the foundation for a world which will be possible only after a time of recovery, of reconstruction, and of rebuilding. 4, the New World Order will be founded on the recognition that all men are equal in origin and goal, but all are at different stages of evolutionary development, that personal integrity, intelligence, vision, and experience, plus a marked goodwill should indicate leadership. The domination of the proletariat, this is the Marxist language, the domination of the proletariat over the aristocracy and bourgeoisie, as in Russia, or the domination of an entrenched aristocracy over the proletariat and middle classes, as has been until lately the case in Great Britain, must disappear. The control of labor by capital or the control of capital by labor must also go. Kind of see what the UN is pushing for right here? And so
is that the United Nations or the League of Nations?
No, this is the spiritual foundation of the United Nations.
See, folks, this is why you don't mix religion with politics. Whew.
So this gets okay. Number 5. I'm gonna leave it at 5 so that we can move on. Number 5. Because there's actually 9 of them.
Okay, leave it at 5.
Yeah, leave it at 5. 5. In the New World Order, a governing body in any nation should compose of those who work for the greatest good of the greatest number and who at the same time offer opportunity to all, seeing to it that the individual is left free. Today, the men of vision are achieving recognition, thus making possible a right choice of leaders. It was not possible until this century.
So that's the call for equality of opportunity, or equality of outcome, I mean.
Pretty much pretty much.
That's what they're calling out, is all men shall be equal whether they want to be or not. You're just all going to have the same outcome.
Yeah, so it's okay, so this is where you get the outcome-centric sort of ideas, but so where does feminism pick up this sort of thing? Like, how does the UN political structure, how does some of those ideas translate back to academia?
Because one of the things that you're going to see, particularly when you get into feminist speakers like Catherine McKinnon, who's quoted as saying, I consider no feminism to be, or I do not consider it feminism unless it is post-structurally, or structurally post-Marxist, sorry.
Yeah, so I get the academic part of that.
There are some people within feminism that inhabit and have been entrenched in academia for substantial periods. I mean, feminist academia has existed since certainly the early mid-'70s. And these are people functioning
60s.
from a... Well, I would say firmly entrenched. I mean, they started to inhabit academia in the 60s, and they were firmly entrenched certainly by the mid-'70s. These are people that function from this Lacanian and Marxist philosophical position that says that there are oppressed and oppressors, and therefore we must break down this binary system, and it's going to cause this social flattening, where everyone is equally free.
Yeah, interesting thing here is Well, there's two things that still need to be mentioned before we can move on to the academic part, and that is the first one is Soren Kierkegaard. I cannot pronounce his name.
Kierkegaard.
How is it?
Kierkegaard.
Kierkegaard. Apparently
Kierkegaard.
on the Kierkegaard.
I cannot pronounce. That's a
okay.
Scandinavian name, right?
Let's just stick with the American way of saying it, Kierkegaard, and then we'll be fine.
Kierkegaard.
Actually, the way I've always heard it pronounced was Kierkegaard.
Yeah, that's how I've heard it pronounced.
Kierkegaard.
Kierkegaard. Okay.
If anybody could throw us a pronunciation key in the comments section, that would be great.
No, I looked it up in a sound pronunciation once, and it was Kierkegaard in English anyway. Anyway, past the pronunciation part. So Soren Kierkegaard actually wrote quite a bit about social leveling, which is what this is essentially. So social leveling is that everyone gets put on the same level. You take the people at the top, you drag them down, take a really tall person and scrunch them down, and if you can, you take the midget and give him a couple extra inches. That is essentially grotesquely summarizing a lot of Kierkegaard's utterly undecipherable publications, but that's one of many things he advocated for. So there's also this section of philosophy that has existed too. So it's not just psychoanalytics or Marxism and so forth. There's this independent branch of philosophy that does bleed into this at some point.
Well, and I mean, certainly the person that I've argued with a senior philosophy lecturer on Twitter, and it was quite amusing because his sole book on philosophy is about Kierkegaard. And this is the person who told me that he was it functionally suggested he was a gatekeeper as far as who was allowed to criticize feminism, and the standard by which is that you must be a published feminist. And Kierkegaard does deal with not only social leveling, he also deals with identity. But
again, a Freudian concept. But yeah, so this existed in philosophy. The interesting thing to point out, most of you can read this. I believe it's in the public domain or it's available publicly. The criticism against social leveling was written by Kurt Vonnegut in his short story Harrison Bergeron. Most of you have read it in school.
And if you haven't, please do so.
Exactly. So, I mean, if you read that, you can immediately
there was a movie that came out in 2015 based.
Oh, fuck the movie. Fuck the movie.
It's still. I mean, if you wanna treat it accessibly, at least the movie is an entry point to it.
But it's a short novella. It's like a couple of paragraphs. I mean, really.
Well, no, actually, Kurt Vonnegut actually wrote it. Like the short story itself is actually, I want to say it comes out about 50 pages.
Really?
The version I read was actually quite in depth. It spoke of Harrison Bergeron's parents, as well as there was more backstory about the young lady who is essentially the prima dancer.
Okay, this is funny. I go on Wikipedia to check the external links to see if there's a link to it. Apparently not. So it might not be in public domain, but you can find it online anyway. People have posted it. But some of the external links link to critical essays and literature analyses and things like that. So this sort of thing is pretty insidious.
Maybe we should get Nicholas Goroff to read it. He already did Kurt Vonnegut's To Be or Not to Be.
Well, I guess I'll leave that to you. But, yeah, so this is philosophically, Soren Kierkegaard is the main advocate of things like social leveling and, what was the other one, Marking Bad?
Well, equality of outcome, but
yeah.
But also there's lots of stuff that goes into that whole identity argument. That's like a whole other episode. Like we could spend 2 hours on that.
This is also like the sort of really immense cynicism of the time, because a lot of people were starting to think, like Kierkegaard, that you could not actually achieve equality unless you had equality of outcome. They thought like the old historicists thought, that inequality was just a fact of history. That unless you upset the cycle somehow with some extreme action, the cycle of history would just keep repeating. And so the people at the bottom would rebel. They would move up to some of them would move up to the top, and the oppression cycle would continue. This is an idea from the old historicists, and this is also around the same time frame. So again, you have that sort of academic bleed through where the results of one field of study, however bullshit, will influence somebody else who, through that cynicism, comes up with ideas to deal with it. So Soren Kierkegaard is reacting to the intellectual thought of his time. This is how most academics work. So he's reacting to this idea that you cannot actually escape the inevitable oppression cycle. So he's saying, okay, the only way to deal with this then, we must take all the people at the top, drag them down to the bottom, make everybody equal of outcome no matter what, make everybody the exact same, and that is the closest you're going to get to a utopian society. And Harrison Bergeron, by Kurt Vonnegut, is basically Kurt Vonnegut reading that and going, holy shit, this reality you're proposing is absolutely monstrous. Which is usually how that works. I mean, 1984 is George Orwell taking the socialist ideology and going, holy shit, this is what your ideology is heading toward. You know, so fiction authors actually tend to be reacting to main strains of ideology. And now we can get into academic feminism.
Mm-hmm.
We've covered all of our historical bases, some of the big names like Derrida, Kierkegaard, and so forth.
God, Socrates, you guys took so long to get here. I feel like somebody plucked out all my nut hairs with tweezers.
Hey, look, we just summarized what would have originally been a 48-hour-long lecture series. I've
I
listened.
know, but I'm letting you know how painful it was to sit.
Look, I have sat through 3 separate lecture series from Oxford, Stanford, and Cambridge on theory of literature to try and piece this shit together. If y'all can't sit through an hour or 2 hours of just racing through that, I hate you all, because I've had to sit through this for far longer, and so is Philosophy Nerd. It hurts.
Oh, God. No.
It hurts. He actually had to take classes in it. I was just listening to people who thought they knew something talk about it.
Well, you're bearing in mind I am playing the part of Joe Average here.
Yeah, well, I'm just saying, though, listen, Joe Average, no arcade. We've had to sit through this crap so you don't have to. Just bear with us.
So now here's where it becomes really relevant, because deconstruction posits that there are no binaries, and when you encounter one, you have to deconstruct it and then reconstruct it so that it is no longer explained as a binary.
Yes.
Now here's where all the irony comes flying in at us that gets represented to us within these socially reactive equality movements, or these, generally speaking, they're not even equality movements, they're just socially reactive movements, to me. Whether it be feminism or Black Lives Matter, the Black Panthers, the KKK was a socially reactive movement. Now, how deeply they delve into this material and how much they incorporate it into their core, I guess, indoctrination varies. But within feminism in particular, you have this notion that there is an oppressed group and an oppressive group, and therefore we have to deconstruct this binary and level everyone socially. And then you have things like, well, white men are always at the top, so we have to deconstruct that and try and get everybody equal.
Yeah,
And this,
so
but this also presumes that there is some binary state of equality that applies to everyone.
A summary of the way I look at it. Now, you guys can pick this apart any way you want to, but the summary of the way I look at it is it's like in college and other high places of quote-unquote learning, it's like they're trying to convince the average idiot that everybody is oppressing you except for the dumbass you stare at in the mirror in the fucking morning.
Well, I hold to Isaac Watts' position that that not everybody is endowed. I don't think that's the right word, but not everybody has the same mental capacity, uh, and that and at the same and we all have our own strengths and weaknesses. We all have our own talents, and we have cards that in life we have cards that we're dealt. The question now is, uh, we have equal opportunity, but how do we play the cards properly and stop bitching and moaning about it?
Well, and one of my frequent analogies is I'm sure everybody has seen the image of three guys attempting to watch the baseball game, but there's a fence in the way. And so the
Mhm.
claim is made that you give them the correct number of boxes because all three of them are different heights. One guy can almost see over the fence. One guy is of apparently average height, and the last guy is very clearly of much lower than average height. And so
So
equality of their claim is that equality of opportunity is to give the first guy one box, the second guy two boxes, the third guy three boxes, and then that way they can all see over the fence. And
now see, guys, this is where I come in as a utilitarian. Now, as a utilitarian, here's the damning question. The tall guy can make more use of more boxes than the short guys because he is naturally taller. Therefore, he gets more utility out of giving more to him and gives back more to society because of it than the other guys.
and my counter argument to it is, if you give all three of them ladders, then they can decide whether or not they want to watch the baseball game live or go the fuck home and have a beer instead of standing on the fucking corner outside a fence where the cops are going to come by.
Yeah. Well, there's different ways you can put it. But essentially, the thing to point out is this is in direct, the whole box analogy that Mark and Dad just mentioned is in direct contradiction to classical liberal thought and utilitarianism. So the idea here is instead of giving people who can benefit the most from what you give them access to things like education or funding or what have you, you give the people who will make least use of them the most to try and prop them up. Now, I am not a hardcore utilitarian. I'm not an absolutist, so to speak. I'm not going to take it to an extreme. What I think is there's a happy medium that you can make by giving everyone the same amount. So, in other words, you still have competition between the different groups. You're not gonna achieve.
People, the cream will rise to the top, and the rest of the milk will settle appropriately.
Yeah, you're not going to get equality of outcome, but what you will get is equality of opportunity, which is classic liberal thought, the only thing you can really hope to achieve. And that's my position on it.
And that's kind of the reason why that's the big thing I have with a lot of the feminists is that they want the equal outcome, but the question is, have they put the work in to be that can be the foundation to make that outcome stable?
Well, plus they tend to seem to forget that if the guy who actually was a shitlord and studied his fucking homework and all that sees this daffy twat that doesn't know shit from shampoo getting the same amount of everything he's getting, what's he going to think? He's going to be like, well, fuck it, I put all this hard work into it, she's getting the same shit, what's the point in me even working hard? And then that's going to leave her in a bad way because she's got the same degree from all that propping up, but she doesn't know how to do the fucking job. That's going to wind up putting her in a bad spot.
Yeah, society picks up on that, and then you start to wonder, well, I'm hiring this woman, but she got all of this propping up throughout college, so how do I know she even has an inkling of what she's supposed to do? And that's when you get into enforced diversity requirements.
Which would be, what is that, affirmative action?
Yes.
Which, fascinatingly enough, The feminist majority in Sweden voted to repeal the second that white men were the minority of college or university applicants.
Yeah, and so consider me, for example. I'm a white male. I'm homosexual, but apparently that doesn't matter anymore. Because I'm no longer oppressed for being gay because I can marry people. However that works. And
The
I
fags get shit on like the rest of us.
yeah, exactly. Now us faggots are on the level with all the straight people now, according to feminism. And according to
Well, but that was
academia.
I hate to admit it, but that was actually inevitable. Once they
Yeah, which is fine.
once they used all the glitter fags to scrabble up the ladder, then they kick you in the head and kick you off the ladder.
But
Them and the rest of the gay guys.
yeah, so as a white male, I don't get, at my college, I don't get any scholarships, any grants, anything. Even though I qualify for Phi Theta Kappa, unless I go into something specific, like education for disadvantaged areas, I get nothing off my college loans. And I had a 4.0. I was on the dean's list. I am, among the top of my college. But when I realized I got absolutely nothing out of it, I just quit trying. I mean, passing grade's a passing grade, really, so it doesn't matter. And if you think about it, how many other white men have thought, well, fuck this shit. I have a strong physical body. Trade jobs are paying way more than this degree would pay. Fuck college. I'm taking my ball and going home.
MGTOW. MGTOW. Sorry.
Well, it's not just MGTOW. It's a whole lot. And so what's happening now...
Well, no, but that's the kind of shit that gave rise to MGTOW.
Yeah,
is the very same concept.
Yeah, I would agree. But
it's certainly an element that fed into its production.
Yeah. But the other problem here is this means that men are becoming minorities in colleges and universities. But also it means that their interests are not being represented. At the same time, all of the screaming harpies are yelling that every day is Male History Day. Or every month is Male History Month. So we're becoming minorities in positions where these people are controlling the strain of thought, you might say. They're controlling how people are framing their thoughts. Just like how women are the majority in primary education now, and have been.
But then you have like that one news report. I think it was some lady from, I forget which Scandinavian country it was. He's talking about the Muslim immigrant crisis, saying that the men need to man up and protect the women, and it's like, fuck you, you done did the damage. Now you gotta deal with it.
So, well, this kind of got, I wouldn't say it got off track, but it's kind of sidetracked. This is an important thing to bring up. But now we can get into quite firmly rooted academic feminism that I wanted to mention to begin with when I first got here, is that the suffragette movement and all of that long ago, back when women were trying to get the vote and everything, that eventually bled into, through people increasingly going to college and throughout the 60s and especially the 70s with all those special interest groups in politics pushing for this affirmative action and everything. Now what you have is you have a lot of people identifying as feminists who grew up and were raised in this ideology, going to college, going to university, getting these teaching positions, and starting their own courses in things like feminist theory and gender theory and generally offshoots of things like human sexuality.
Underwater queef music and whatever the fuck else they come up with.
Well, the technical term actually is called basket weaving courses.
Yeah,
that's actually the technical term.
If you really want to know this is coming from a person that has taken a feminism course, graduate level, and also seen it bleed over into other courses as well. I found what's really interesting. I found that I have succeeded more using the historical method of Michael Lacona, getting absolute A's in most of my my final papers using his methodology, while I think one course I'm like, you know what, this is so worthless. The feminism course, I just went hardcore and sounded like an Andrea Dworkin. I failed. In my view, I failed anyways. I only got like a 90%, and the rest of them I got like a 95%.
See, when I first entered college, that's how I felt. Anything less than an A+ is bad. Why you no get A+, son? You know.
Yeah, how does it go? You get B+, you come home, I kill you.
And that's how, I don't even have a family, and that's how I entered college, with that mentality. Because I have very high standards for my own ability to retain information that I learned. And then I realized nobody gave a shit how much I retained. So I stopped trying. You know, why put in all that effort? So I do, old quote is, never let your education interfere with your learning. So most of what I do now is actually outside of college. Most of my reading, most of my studying, nothing that I'm actually taking classes for. Because I learn way more on my own than I do in college courses.
Well, here's something that's very interesting, is that I'll admit this. I did reading outside of the courses, and I bullshitted the course material, and I still succeeded.
Yeah.
And that's
so, go ahead and tell us what your modern feminist theory course was all about. Give us an overview so we can discuss this now that we're past the postmodernism and everything. I mean, go ahead and tell us how this all ended up bleeding together, because I think that's what we're all really here for now that we're done with the history lecture.
Yeah, now that we're back on firm footing that I can actually fully understand.
Okay,
Yes.
so pretty much what it really boiled down to, there's a book, the textbook that was used in the graduate course on feminism is called Textual Sexual Politics. So the textual, I think, sexual politics, and it does go into the concept of the patriarchy. It goes into an overview of the influences upon feminist thought in France, in the United Kingdom, the United States, the differences, things like that. Then there's like 5 novels you actually have to read, because it is a literature course, of course.
Of course.
Of course. A literature course, of course. So the first things first. The first author was a very short novel, and you had to pretty much deal with like her oppression, the abuse she felt in her family and stuff like that. I think the one I actually did enjoy out of that all was a feminist version of fairy tales called The Bloody Chamber, and it's a collection of that. But it was.
Oh, God.
That's actually the only one that I actually enjoyed out of all of it. But overall, the whole thing was all about. It really is about bitching and moaning about how men oppress women, and the majority of the people in there were women. The professor was a woman, and so I knew to. And now this is where it gets interesting. You all know that, like, as a person that doesn't hold a feminist theory, I had to pretend to be a hardcore feminist to even survive it, and pretty much tickle the clit of the professor. That's pretty much it.
Professor, yeah, you had to tickle the clit of Professor in her chamber pot of tampons.
Yeah,
You basically had to satisfy the matriarchy.
Yeah, I had to satisfy the matriarchy, and my whole thing
Can
is.
can I just posit an ew?
Yeah. So this is where, like, when I went through this, I'm like, I went through hell with this stuff, and because I've always I've always been a critical thinker. I've received I have Puritan influence, which makes me question all this stuff, and so what was very interesting about this about feminist theory. What's very interesting about feminist theory is that it's like, if you can make it sound like women are oppressed, men are assholes, women are from Venus, and men are from hell.
I've read
And
that book actually. It's
yeah,
fucking awful.
if you can actually if you can make it sound like that in your academic papers, and at least and have decent grammar, you'll pass the course. It's such an easy theory.
Yeah.
So you
And
just you just have to make it sound like men are the biggest dick bags ever devised on any planet anywhere.
Yeah, pretty much.
yeah. And where this bleeds into modern feminism, I would say, is simply due to the fact, again, going back to my little pet theory, a little knowledge is dangerous. Well, most people have taken some college courses. A good chunk of women end up taking courses that are, women's studies, gender studies, soft sciences like that, because women seem innately drawn to the more interpretive stuff. There are far more women who have degrees in the soft sciences or in the non-sciences than there are men. That just seems to be what they're drawn to, in spite of kicking and screaming and saying we need more women in STEM. They don't seem to want to do that. Most of them.
Well, here's another thing. Even men that are in the arts and humanities, such as history, such as literature, such as philosophy, we tend to do much more of a legal. We tend to argue more legalistically than we.
Analytically.
Yeah, analytically.
For example, if you analyze these courses, far more men will take analytic philosophy than women. Like, if philosophy nerd, have you taken an analytic philosophy course?
I have not, but I've actually read a book on analytical reading and philosophy.
Well, I've seen one of those classes, and basically it's like 100% men. You won't see women in those courses. But if you take non-analytic philosophy courses, like history of philosophy and things like that, you'll have a more even distribution between men and women. Women just seem more naturally drawn to what seems to be non-competitive classes, for example.
Well, what's very interesting when you I think it's Gensler's book Introduction to Logic. If you actually take on that's actually what really that Isaac Watts, Michael Lacona, a couple others. That's really what made me realize, to throw out all this literary theory that they've been trying to shove down my throat, and just look at it from a historical presuppositional lens. And what I mean by that is, what if you have like, for example, you talk about Kierkegaard. Well, if you have one of his shorter writings, how do you analyze it? You have to take into account somewhat of his background, the historical time period. You have to get as close to me as a literature critic. My job is to get as close to what his intention was at that time, and at the same time look at the aesthetics and structure of his language for a proper exegesis.
Okay, before historicism, I've listened to so many lectures, I've forgotten what the word is, but before historicism, there was a vein of theory of history which basically said we can only understand history from the perspective of what we can piece together of that time period. So
Romanticism.
I don't think it was romanticism.
Realism.
I don't. There was a special word for it, and for the life of me, I cannot find it. But basically, there used to be an understanding of history which made the most sense and said you can only understand what this person was going through if you can piece together what his living experiences were. So
yeah, that's romanticism. There might have been a different name used, but that's the name now used for that particular philosophical analysis.
Yeah, it makes sense, though, because if you want to understand how Cicero was thinking, for example, you can't just read what he wrote. You need to do all of the intense academic legwork of trying to piece together how he might have lived in that time period.
Well,
so it's a lot of work. You have to know a lot about history. You have to know a lot about the literature that he wrote, what other people were writing. It's a lot of work.
Yeah, that's the reason why I would have to say, like, I put a lot more time. The average English major when I was in, they'd be out drinking, they'd be out doing whatever. But I was actually at home trying my best with what limited time I had.
That does explain why most English majors, as far as I can tell, don't really know shit from shampoo.
Well, no, they don't.
Because you write your essay the day before. That's what I did. I still got A's.
Yeah, and that's kind of the reason why when I walked into a lot of classes, I'm like, that when they started saying certain things, I'm like for example, I did take I took this class called Literature of the Bible. They actually from a secular perspective. It's not. It wasn't a religious school.
Okay.
But University of Central Florida is not affiliated with any religion. So what was very interesting in there is that the average person in there never took any classes about the literature of the Bible itself. What was a Yahwist? What was anything? And this comes down to the biggest thing, like the average feminist. And this, I'm going to bring it back to feminism. The average feminism has never truly built up their background knowledge to ever be able to do any interpretation of anything apart from boo-hoo, I'm a woman.
Yeah, no, and that's exactly right, because you don't have to take any precursor classes to take a feminist course.
Mm-mm. And no, you don't.
Yeah, so you have plenty of feminists who don't know the history of feminist theory, and they don't know philosophy, they don't know any sciences, they don't know any of this stuff, and this is more a criticism of modern academia. So if you haven't attended college courses, a lot of these feminist courses are at the 101 level, the beginning level. You can just attend it with no prerequisites. Just your first day of college, there you are.
Yeah, and this is where I would have to say, this is why I actually, as my concern is I would, if I was to get hired as a professor in the humanities, and I really do hope I am, I'm working on that. I would like to have, I want to have kids get very used to critical thinking. So I want them to get, because of the way the world works, get them used to analyzing an informational text. So I would have them read Isaac Watts' logic to get them into basics of critical thinking and get them exposed to a formal informational text. And then what I would like to do is have them choose I would have to choose 3 novels, not to overburden them, and have them use the rules that Isaac Watts explains to analyze the piece, and then have them bring in background sources so that at least they're learning to at freshman composition 2 level to start splicing informational texts to analyze a literary piece.
Well, pedagogy aside, what I wanted to do is also mention how this is feeding into what we're seeing today. The funny thing with all of the mentions we made about Marxism and all this other stuff to do with the proletariat or the oppressed, reality check, most of the people who learned these things were middle class or upper middle class or aristocratic class in terms of economics. Like, these are the people who, for most of history, they were the only ones who could attend university and college. So all of this stuff about oppressed classes comes from the upper echelons of the social class to begin with.
Yeah, exactly. That's why it makes me question whether or not these assholes are oppressed, because, you know, Daddy buys you the brand new fucking iPhone, I have to go out, work, and buy my own, and you're fucking sitting there telling me you're fucking oppressed.
Yeah,
Fuck
no.
up.
This is the interesting thing, is you initially had, like with the Frankfurt School, you had people in academia going, we need to do something about the poor classes. These people are suffering, they can't even clothe their children.
And the
so in
irony
the
of
United
that,
States, well,
the,
no,
the irony of that being Marx forced his family to live in abject poverty.
I wouldn't say forced. He kind of lived a shitty life against
He
his
did.
own will.
He did, but there were several opportunities he had to have provided much better, and his wife was, I mean, this is also a reflection on what his wife considered to be an appropriate lifestyle, because she was originally from the upper class.
Oh boy.
Anyway, let's wrap this up. So,
Well, yeah,
you finish what you're doing.
So essentially, what it boils down to is initially there was a kind of aristocratic or middle class who went to universities and college, and this is where you get people who are realizing, as more information comes through, that there's an immense amount of suffering in the poor classes in America, for example. And this kind of happens all around the world in a similar format. So you'll have a sudden interest, for example, in academia, but also in government, about trying to learn why there's so many poor people. Then in America, what you had was the war on poverty. So those two events kind of happened simultaneously. Then what you have is more social policies to try and lift up the poor, and different thoughts about how to do that and what that eventually means. So this is where you get people like Soren Kierkegaard, who are realizing that the only way to really get equality is to hobble the people at the top. So that's social leveling kind of thing. And the irony is it eventually leads into this thought about Marxist oppression, because it's all too easy to think that there's a permanent oppressed class and a permanent aristocracy. Now, in the modern world, that's not really the case at all, but it takes time for information to propagate. So where we are now is this idea in feminist theory and in much of academia, who have to take these courses to graduate most of the time. What we're really at now is this idea that instead of there being class oppression, there's only identity oppression, which is a Freudian idea to begin with. And if you look through something like Google's Ngram field, for example, if you try to find the original use of identity in academia, identity is a Freudian concept that was first introduced by an author who, in the footnotes, blatantly said, this term has no meaning. It is a nebulous concept with no concrete meaning that I'm only using as a placeholder because I lack anything better.
Well,
And that
and
is-
if you're gonna if you're going to talk about class oppression there, Socrates, yeah, that would be the bullshit courses that they make take in college that have nothing to do with what you're there for.
Yeah, and
I'm
so
surprised they haven't gotten to the point where they legitimately just have a course based on you're a white person, and therefore we're going to let all of the people that are non-white and non-gender binary and all of these other non-white to non-male identities, we're just going to let them walk through the class and then beat you with things.
yeah, and this is where we're at now. Instead of focusing on the class, the potential for maybe there is some class-based oppression, maybe there's some social disadvantage for the poor, for example. Instead of focusing on that, now, by magic of academic thought, we're only focusing on arbitrary qualities of the poor. Like, oh, blacks are overrepresented in the poor, for example. The majority of people who are poor are white. But it doesn't matter, because blacks are statistically overrepresented in the poor, apparently.
Yeah. So if you have 1,000 black people and 500 of them are poor, you have 50% of those 1,000 people that are poor. If you have 10,000 white people, you have 501 of them that are poor. By actual population, there are more poor white people, but by actual percentage, blacks are significantly greater.
Yeah, so the funny thing is that is premised on sort of racist thought to begin with, because what you're doing there is you're basing your idea on something as arbitrary as skin color,
Yeah.
instead of something like just being poor.
That actually gets back to where my biggest concern, like I said in my introduction, the critical pedagogy is this concept of identity politics is actually found is creeping through pedagogy and has found itself reaching all the way down into pre-K, and so you're having very, very young kids being propped up, saying, "Well, your identity is being oppressed, and this is why," and whatever. So this very concept of racism is being fed to.
Well, to give you an example, I'm not going to recall exactly which school it was, but there is I believe it's a private school in New York in the kind of the Columbia University campus area, where 8 and 9-year-old students in like a grade 4 or 5 class wrote a letter to Disney about cultural appropriation and insensitivity to identity. As though, like, this is not something that an 8 or 9-year-old is going to be able to write without substantial coaching.
Yeah, this is sort of this indoctrination that happens because their teachers took those underwater basket weaving courses to graduate, and again, most of them are women, but also if you are a teacher, you can get like most of your loans forgiven if you work in education for 5-10 years. For example.
Well, here's my biggest qualm here with people like that getting into education is the fact that you have administrators now promoting this shit. The fact that they don't want to admit, like, and this is anecdotal, but whatever. It's a great example. When I was 8 years old, I lived in California, and I didn't live at the beach. I lived in the mountainous areas, so I was a mountain kid. I climbed rocks. Shit, that's what I like doing.
Mountainous area, Missouri. Woo!
Yeah,
I grew up in Alberta.
Yeah, so I didn't give
right next door.
I didn't give a fuck. I really didn't give a flying fuck about identity politics. My whole thing was getting off that big ass boulder without breaking a shin. That was my whole qualm at that point. Not this crap that they're teaching today.
Yeah, there's a certain lack of emphasis on practicality, I think. But
Well,
that gets into a whole discussion about pedagogy, which is not exactly what the hangout here is about. I think we've covered a lot of bases here.
Well, and we're pushing about an hour and a half. I think that's a good time to kind of wrap it up, and we'll save a little bit for next week or the week after.
well,
Oh, geez, only an hour and a half? This is actually going to turn out to be pretty dense when you think about it. Magnus, have you managed to keep up?
Sort of.
Well, I haven't said a whole hell of a lot to tell you guys to back off on the language, so yeah.
okay, so here's my final say on this. My biggest concern with feminist theory today is the fact that we no longer have, and I think this will be good for a segue for maybe next week or the week after, is that we no longer, radical feminism has itself splintered. You no longer have just radical feminism. You have neo-feminism and post-feminism, and the real egocentric group are the neo-feminists. They're all about being better than men, and and that's something I think we should.
Clarification. Being better than men by dragging men down.
Yeah.
They're not actually interested in putting in the effort, for example, to do all of the legwork to try and run as fast as a man, for example.
They just want men to have hobbles.
Yeah, they want to kick their shins in so they can't run.
And so you have the neo-feminism is actually to get into neo-feminism. I think this coming week or maybe next week, we should talk about we should study up on the concept of radical feminism and the difference between radical feminism and liberal feminism. And the biggest thing we have to understand is that where liberal feminism, it's like you might have the idea of individuality. Well, radical feminism is different because it's kind of like a hive mind. So if you take
all the Marxism.
Anita Sarkeesian would be more radical feminist, whereas
well, she's a collectivist. So yeah. This is all about collectivism.
And that's, one of the other things that comes up is not only is there collectivist radical feminism, but, then you've got the various subgroups of, like, political lesbianism and Dianic Wiccanism that feeds into it, and that's where you get the particularly narcissistic ones. They typically have some Dianic vein running through it.
Yeah, so
and just from the average Joe's understanding of science and scientific terms, feminism has nothing that qualifies as a theory. It barely even passes as a half-assed fucking hypothesis.
Yeah, pretty much.
Even from philosophical literature, I would say it is not a hypothesis per se, because it does not posit an educated or rational guess. It posits an ideology or presupposition. So that's my position on it.
My position, my position is pretty much that. But to sum it up, I would say we can call it bullshit without.
Well, and for next time, the thing I would like to get into is actually the how our modern education is sort of indoctrinating people into these thoughts. Now, the interesting thing is the internet is fighting back against that. What we are seeing is what happened during the Renaissance when all of our major educational institutions were funded, like Cambridge University, for example. Or Oxford, especially Oxford. Originally, it was a backlash against institutional thinking. What we are probably going to see here is an increased emphasis on layman's self-education, because all of this information is now available online. All you have to do is have the self-discipline and patience to try and sit through it. And it is fucking hard. I mean, you're going to want to slit your wrist if you try to sit through an Oxford Theory of Literature course. But it's there. It's online. You can do it. It's 20-some hours, but you can do it.
Well, and before Mark closes this out, I just got one thing I want to say about this. For anybody of the feminist persuasion, whoever persuaded you to be that was a rotten fucker, but anyway, anyone of the feminist persuasion that actually made it this far, I invite you to do one simple thing. Think about it.
Yeah, I would say...
Failing that, I'll take a feminist on a live stream. I'll have a debate about it.
Oh, I will too. I mean, I'm what you would call a philosophical skeptic. I'm
Philosophical agnostic, philosophical skeptic. Same shit, different pile.
Emphasis on the skeptic. I'm more in the skeptic class of David Hume. I mean, frankly, as far as I'm concerned, I don't know if you all exist. I could be hallucinating. But I'm a bit extreme in that regard.
So I say we actually cover the basics pretty well. I'm hoping that at least this reaches some people and makes them think a little bit. So on top of that, I want to go ahead and thank Marking Bad for putting the links into the comments section, and because those are going to actually help people break it down if they want to keep up with the discussion even more or go deeper. What's also on top of that, if you go into the links that Marking Bad put in there, there's a list of bibliography. So if you want to know any more if you want to know more about the topic, you can go into those book suggestions. If you are new to philosophical inquiry, I highly recommend Isaac Watts' Logic to learn the critical thinking methods that we're using. And then that's it on my end.
All right. Well, I think we covered the. If there's anything we missed, folks, add comments below. We'll try and pick it up the next time we do this. So.
All right. Thank you, Socrates.
Just to thank Magnus, Socrates, and Philosophy Nerd for being here.
And for those of you who are going to leave rude comments telling us we don't know what the fuck we're talking about, just go ahead and cram it right now.
Or expect that you will be served with a hot steaming plate of we know exactly what we're talking about.
And for the odd elitist who will come in from, I have 3 doctorates in basket weaving, underwater basket weaving, and specialist in bat acoustics.
Let me take this one. Your PhDs in underwater basket weaving are fancy toilet paper monogrammed. Shut it.
Yeah, This is the age of self-education.
How sad is it that I can say that my stint in trucking school served me far better than any of these motherfuckers' PhDs will ever serve them.
Remember, PhD all too frequently means piled higher and deeper.
Full of shit.
Okay.
All right. Thanks for playing, everyone.
Have a good one.
All right. Have a good one.
Nighty-nighty.